Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking to Gabriel Hopkins from FICO about fraud. Welcome, Gabriel.
Hi there.
What trends are currently troubling bank fraud experts?
Fraud trends change all the time, and it's really sort of interesting to see how fraudsters adapt to different circumstances. We actually conduct with Euromonitor a fraud survey every year that gives us a map of the way that fraud's emerging across Europe, which is available on our website at www.fico.com/European fraud. That's definitely worth checking out if you're someone who's interested in fraud. We look at fraud in 19 different countries, and in 2016 we think the full value of fraud was somewhere around 1.8 billion euros. Now that's obviously a huge amount of money, and it's sometimes difficult to see how that's sort of permitted, but it's a really difficult balance trying to stop enough fraud whilst also not getting in the way of a good customer experience. There's a couple of trends I'd call out in particular. So we've seen a huge rise in CNP fraud over the last few years. CNP stands for cardholder not present. For most people that means e-commerce transactions, but it also means transactions that people do on the phone. And in many ways they're the hardest to secure, but also at the same time they're also growing hugely quickly. So we all buy a lot of things on particular e-commerce websites, and that's changed the patterns dramatically. So in 2008, about 50% of fraud was due to those CMP e-commerce type transactions. And if we look at 2016, it's more like 70%. In the UK, it's actually more like 80%. So CMP is a huge problem area which banks have had a hard time struggling to secure. So there's some changes coming over the next few years with things like PSD2, but also at the same time, companies like FICO are working to help secure those transactions better through better use of data analytics and through trying to trap those fraudulent transactions in the first occurrence rather than maybe waiting a bit longer so that we can reduce the impact on that fraud. The other trend that we see is prevalent everywhere is fraud professionals trying to balance customer experience versus fraud loss prevention. So how can I find the frauds while not giving people a difficult time? And that's, as I say, that's harder with CMP, and that's probably one of the reasons that we're seeing an increase in fraud. But we should note that actually fraud is generally pretty much being kept under control, but there are certain areas we need to go look at. A couple more places which I'd call out, Sweden and Poland have also actually suffered increases in fraud, and I think that's probably largely due to people trying to get that balance right. A lot of CMP transactions taking place. How do we make sure that the customer gets a really good experience when they're using their card in those markets?
How should banks deal with customers when there is a potential fraud?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that a lot of banks do already, something we see time and time again being incredibly beneficial and really everyone should do, is make the most of those communications at the point of a suspicious transaction. So when your card gets blocked or you're doing an e-commerce transaction and it doesn't go through, that's a really horrible interaction. People hate that. And what banks can do is they can switch that around, take what's perceived to be a bad interaction and turn it into a positive interaction. And so by using multiple different ways of reaching out to customers, modern ways of reaching out to customers like text messages, emails, making automated voice calls out to customers, you can engage the customer really very quickly after that suspicious transaction happens. So that might be while you're standing in the line in the supermarket and your card's been declined for some reason. Maybe the bank thinks it's fraudulent because it's not a supermarket you often shop in. By reaching out to the customer while they're in line, while they're maybe even still feeling a bit embarrassed or they're searching for another card, the banks can re-establish trust in that card, get people spending again, but also they can get a hugely beneficial effect. By understanding which are the good transactions and which are the bad transactions quickly, they can better understand those fraud patterns. So we see huge benefits in using this technology. Banks can investigate more fraud, so they can look for new trends, for new potential frauds. They can deal with those seasonal changes that happen, Christmas Eve, running up to Christmas, all those different sales that happen these days. They don't have to staff up for those. They can respond to those by using automated tools to reach out to customers. And what we actually find is that as well as benefits to banks, reduction in costs, being able to get their fraud analysts to do more sophisticated things, there's actually a huge benefit to the consumer. So when you survey consumers and take these metrics like customer satisfaction or net promoter score, NPS, what we see is that people say about banks that reach out to them, this bank is looking out for me, it's interesting me. Obviously, if you do it too much, it goes too far, but getting that balance right, that's extremely powerful. So that's a great way for banks to really turn that fraud experience from a negative experience to a positive experience.
What machine learning techniques are most effective in fighting fraud?
So I'm not sure it's really down to just one particular machine learning technique. What we find is actually you have to examine the problem that you're facing. You need to think about what techniques work best. Try out different techniques, maybe combine different techniques together to really get to the best possible results. So at FICO, we've been using neural net technology within Falcon for about 25 years. That's a really good technique because it's very fast. You can use it at very high volume, so you can screen thousands of transactions a second and get really good results coming out. But there are other techniques such as self-calibrating models which learn from the data as they go. And we use something called collaborative profiles. That's super powerful. What you're doing there is having the machine learning understand particular patterns and behaviors of groups of customers and then assigning people to those customers. So we may pick out this, it's really something that the machine learning algorithms are very good at and you can't really put into human form, but you might think about it as being, I'm going to categorize someone as being a traveler or a stay-at-home dad or an e-commerce shopper. What we can then do is understanding that archetype, we'll calibrate people against the different factors. So I may be a 25% traveler personality, a 5% e-commerce shopper personality. What that gives us the ability to do, which is really super powerful, is one, adapt in real time. So as I change, I move around, my profile changes, so the system adapts to me, but also predict things that I might do which I've never done before, because we can see people that are similar to me exhibiting that behavior. So techniques like that we think are really super powerful, but it's not just about any single technique. You want to look at the problem at hand, understand where the challenges are, and then design something using a number of techniques to really get the best possible performance from machine learning.
Thank you, Gabriel. If you'd like to find out more information about fraud and how FICO can help you, the web address is www.fico.com/fraud.